Ketharan stood before the observation window of the neutral assembly station and watched the stars. Behind him, dozens of diplomats and military officers from 100 different species talked in low voices. They were all here for the same reason. War had come to the galaxy once again. For 200 years, Ketharan had served as a military analyst for the Galactic Concord. He had seen wars that burned across star systems. He had watched the Thaxian swarms devour entire planets. He had studied the cold, perfect killing machines of the Meldari war mines. He had documented the fall of empires and the rise of new powers. War, he believed, held no more surprises for him. He was wrong. The conflict that brought him here seemed simple enough. The Dravex Imperium, a proud race of reptilian conquerors, had declared war on the Human Systems Alliance. The humans were newcomers to the galactic stage. They had only achieved faster than light travel 80 years ago. They had only joined the Concord 40 years ago. To most species in the galaxy, humans were barely worth noticing. The Dravex had noticed them. More importantly, the Dravex had decided that human space would make an excellent addition to their empire. They had labeled humanity a prey species and launched their invasion fleet toward 3 human frontier colonies. Ketharan turned away from the window and walked to his workstation. His 4 arms moved across the holographic displays, pulling up data on both sides of the conflict. The numbers told a clear story. The Dravex had 17 battle fleets. The humans had 4. The Dravex had been conquering other species for 3,000 years. The humans had never fought a war in space. This would be over quickly, Ketharan thought. 2 standard cycles at most. Then the humans would sue for peace, give up their frontier colonies, and learn a painful lesson about their place in the galaxy. It was the same story he had seen play out dozens of times before. A message appeared on his display. The Concord had offered to intervene, to negotiate a peaceful settlement before blood was spilled. The Dravex had refused. Of course, they smelled weakness and wanted their conquest, but the humans had also refused. Ketharan read the message twice, certain he had misunderstood. The Human Systems Alliance had formally requested that the Concord delay any intervention. They wished to handle this themselves. He leaned back in his chair and felt something close to pity. These poor, naive creatures. They had no idea what was coming for them. The Dravex were not like the primitive enemies humans had faced on their homeworld. They were efficient, brutal, and utterly without mercy. Human courage, however admirable, would not save them. A junior analyst approached his station. She was a Vellani, a small species with large eyes and delicate features. Senior analyst Ketharan. The first engagement reports are coming in from the human colony designated New Helsinki. Ketharan nodded and pulled up the data feed. New Helsinki was a small world on the edge of human space. Population, 2 million. Defense force, approximately 40,000 soldiers and a small orbital garrison. The Dravex had sent a full invasion fleet of 200 warships and 500,000 ground troops. The battle had begun 6 hours ago. Ketharan expected to see the usual pattern. Initial resistance, followed by rapid collapse, followed by surrender or evacuation. It was the only logical response to such overwhelming force, but as he studied the reports, a small frown crossed his face. The human orbital garrison had been destroyed in the first hour. That was expected. But instead of surrendering, the surviving crews had rammed their crippled ships into Dravex vessels. 17 human ships had been lost. They had taken 12 Dravex ships with them. On the ground, the pattern continued. Human defenders were outnumbered 8-1. Standard military doctrine said they should fall back to defensive positions, slow the enemy advance, and wait for evacuation. Instead, the humans were attacking. Ketharan watched footage of a human battalion charging directly into Dravex lines. They were cut down by the dozens, but they kept coming. They fought with rifles, then with pistols, then with knives and bare hands. The Dravex had expected prey. They found something else entirely. This is insane, the Vellani analyst whispered beside him. Why don't they retreat? Ketharan had no answer. He continued to watch as the battle unfolded. Hour after hour, the humans fought and died. Their casualties mounted into the thousands, but they did not break. They did not run. They did not surrender. He pulled up communication intercepts from the human forces. Most of it was tactical information, but one transmission caught his attention. It was from a human commander to his troops, sent just before a final defensive action. Hold this line. Every minute we stand is another minute for the civilians to reach the evacuation ships. We are not dying for nothing. We are dying for them. Make it count. Ketharan played the message again and again. He had studied war for 2 centuries. He understood sacrifice in tactical terms, the trading of units for strategic advantage. But this was something different. These humans were not trading their lives for territory or resources. They were trading their lives for people they would never meet. The battle for New Helsinki lasted 17 days. The Draveks had expected it to last 3. When it was over, the colony had fallen, but the Draveks had suffered 3 times their projected casualties. More troubling still, not all the human defenders had died. Some had melted into the wilderness, taking their weapons with them. The Draveks now controlled the cities, but the forests and mountains had become hunting grounds where their patrols disappeared without a trace. Ketharan received a new intelligence report. The humans called this tactic insurgency. He read about their history, about wars on their homeworld where small groups of fighters had held off vast armies for years, even decades. He read about something called guerrilla warfare, and felt the first stirring of unease. The next day, another message arrived from the Human Systems Alliance. The Concord had once again offered to negotiate a peace settlement. The humans had once again refused. But this time, they had included something else. A formal declaration. Ketharan read the document carefully. It was called a Declaration of Total War. He did not understand the term, so he searched the human databases for its meaning. He read about human history. He read about wars that consumed entire continents. He read about factories that produced weapons day and night, about entire populations mobilized for conflict, about a species that did not know how to fight small wars. When humans went to war, truly went to war, they committed everything, every resource, every person, every ounce of strength they possessed. He read about something called World War II, a conflict on the human homeworld that had killed 70 million people. He read about cities burned to ash, about weapons that could destroy everything in a flash of light, about a species that had nearly wiped itself out and had somehow emerged stronger. Ketharan set down the datapad. His hands were shaking slightly. For the first time in 200 years, he felt something he had almost forgotten: fear. He walked to his personal quarters and poured himself a drink. Strong alcohol, the kind he usually saved for celebrations or mourning. Tonight, he was not sure which it would be. The Draveks thought they had started a simple war of conquest. They thought they were fighting a prey species, weak and easily dominated. They had no idea what they had awakened. Ketharan raised his glass to the stars outside his window. "May the gods have mercy on them," he said quietly, "because the humans will not." 3 weeks had passed since the fall of New Helsinki. Ketharan sat in his observation chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing battle data from across the war zone. The Draveks' advance continued. 2 more human colonies had fallen. But something was wrong with the numbers. The Draveks were winning every battle. They were taking every objective. By any normal measure, the war was going exactly as expected. But their casualty reports told a different story. They were losing soldiers at 5 times the projected rate. Their supply lines were under constant attack. Their occupation forces were being picked apart by enemies they could not see. Ketharan pulled up footage from the second colony to fall. A world called Prosperity. The name struck him as bitterly ironic now. The city streets were empty. The buildings were burned. But in the hills beyond the city, the war continued. He watched a Draveks patrol move through a narrow valley. There were 50 soldiers, heavily armed and armored. They were veterans of a dozen campaigns. They moved with confidence, secure in their superiority. The ambush came from nowhere. Explosions tore through the patrol from both sides. Human fighters appeared from holes in the ground, from behind rocks, from places the Draveks had already searched and cleared. The battle lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, 38 Dravek soldiers were dead. The humans had lost 7. And then they disappeared back into the wilderness like ghosts. A door opened behind Ketharan. He turned to see a human officer enter his chamber. She was young by human standards, perhaps 30 years old. Her uniform identified her as Captain Yuki Tanaka, assigned as liaison to the Concord observation mission. She had been helpful in explaining human customs and terminology. though Catharan still found much of it confusing. "Senior analyst," she said with a slight bow. "You requested information on human military doctrine." Catharan gestured for her to sit. He had been preparing questions for days, trying to understand what he was seeing. The humans fought like no species he had ever studied. Their tactics made no sense by any standard military logic. "Captain Tanaka, I have been reviewing the battle records from New Helsinki. I observed a human battalion engage a Dravex force that outnumbered them 8-1. Instead of retreating to defensible positions, they attacked. They suffered 90% casualties. Can you explain this decision?" Tanaka was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. They were buying time. The civilian evacuation ships needed another 6 hours to complete loading. That battalion gave them those hours. But they must have known they would die. "Yes. And they attacked anyway." "Yes." Catharan leaned forward. This was the part he could not understand. "In my experience, soldiers fight to survive. They fight to win. They do not throw away their lives for strangers." "What makes human soldiers different?" Tanaka seemed to consider the question carefully. "We have a concept called acceptable losses. It sounds cold when you say it out loud, but it means that sometimes the mission is more important than survival. Those soldiers on New Helsinki knew that their lives could buy time for 2 million civilians to escape. They did the math. They made their choice. They chose to die for people they had never met. They chose to die for people they would never meet," Tanaka corrected. "That's the whole point. A soldier doesn't fight for themselves. They fight for the person next to them. They fight for the family waiting at home. They fight for the children who will grow up in the peace they create. That's what makes it bearable." Catharan sat back in his chair. 200 years of military analysis, and he had never encountered this philosophy. Other species fought for territory, for resources, for survival of their kind. But this was something else. This was sacrifice elevated to an art form. "I have another question," he said. "The survivors on New Helsinki, the ones who did not evacuate, they continue to fight even though the colony has fallen. They have no hope of victory. Why do they not surrender?" Tanaka's expression hardened. "Surrender to the Dravex means slavery or death. Our people know this. So they fight. They make the occupation as painful as possible. They tie down enemy troops that could be used elsewhere. They send a message to every other human world. We do not give up. We do not go quietly. This insurgency, as you call it, how long can it last? As long as there are humans alive to fight. Years, decades, generations, if necessary. We are a stubborn species, senior analyst. We do not know how to quit." Catharan pulled up another display. This one showed economic data from human space. What he saw made his forearms go still. Every human world had shifted to war production. Factories that once made consumer goods now made weapons. Universities had become research centers for military technology. Civilians were volunteering by the millions to serve in any capacity needed. "Your entire civilization is mobilizing," he said quietly. "Yes. The Dravex have no idea what they have started." Tanaka smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, they don't." A new report appeared on Catharan's display. He read it twice, certain there must be an error. The Galactic Concord had once again offered to mediate peace negotiations. The Dravex, growing concerned about their mounting casualties, had expressed willingness to discuss terms. The humans had refused, more than refused. They had issued a formal statement declaring that no peace would be accepted until every occupied human world was liberated, and the Dravex military was no longer capable of threatening human space. "This is unprecedented," Catharan said. "The Dravex are offering you a way out. You could end this war now, with minimal additional losses. Why refuse?" Tanaka stood and walked to the observation window. She stared out at the stars for a long moment before answering. "Because if we accept peace now, they will come back. Maybe not this year, maybe not this decade, but eventually, they will look at us and see prey again. They will invade again. Our children will have to fight this same war we are fighting now." She turned to face him. "We will not allow that. We will end this threat completely, or we will die trying. There is no middle ground." Catharan felt a chill run through his body. He had seen fanaticism before, in religious cults and desperate last stands. But this was different. This was not madness or desperation. This was cold, calculated determination. The humans had looked at the cost of total war and decided it was less than the cost of an uncertain peace. The Draveks have conquered 43 species, he said. They have never lost a war. Then they are overdue. After Tanaka left, Keitharan sat alone in his chamber for a long time. He thought about everything he had seen and heard. He thought about the soldiers who charged into certain death for strangers. He thought about the insurgents who refused to surrender even when all hope was lost. He thought about a species that would burn itself to ashes rather than accept defeat. He had studied war for 200 years. He had seen every kind of conflict imaginable. But he had never seen anything like this. The humans were not just fighting a war. They were waging something far more dangerous. They were waging a crusade. Keitharan began composing a preliminary report to the Concord. His fingers moved slowly across the holographic interface. How could he explain what he was witnessing? How could he make them understand? He settled on a simple warning. The Draveks believe they are fighting a war of conquest. They are wrong. They are fighting a species that has turned war itself into a form of devotion, and that species will not stop until one side or the other is completely destroyed. He sent the report and poured himself another drink. The war was only beginning. 3 months into the war, Keitharan found himself standing in a place he had never expected to visit. The refugee processing station on the human world of Nova Terra was enormous. Thousands of people moved through its halls every hour. Survivors from the 6 colonies that had fallen to the Draveks' advance. He had requested permission to observe the human response to the crisis. The Concord wanted to understand how humanity was handling the pressure of a losing war. What Keitharan found shook him to his core. The station was filled with broken people. He saw families who had lost everything. He saw children who would never see their homes again. He saw the wounded, the traumatized, the grieving. The air was heavy with sorrow, but it was also heavy with something else. Something he did not expect: determination. Keitharan watched as refugees stepped off transport ships with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They were processed through medical stations, given food and water, assigned temporary housing, and then, almost immediately, they began asking the same question: where do I sign up? He followed a group of refugees to an enlistment center. The line stretched around the building and down the street. Young and old, male and female, healthy and injured, they stood in the hot sun for hours, waiting for their chance to join the fight. A human official noticed Keitharan and approached him. "Senior analyst, I was told you would be visiting. Is there anything I can help you with?" Keitharan gestured toward the line. "These people have lost their homes. Many have lost family members. Why are they enlisting?" The official, a tired-looking man with gray hair, shrugged. "Where else would they go? They can't go home. Their homes are gone. So they do the only thing that makes sense. They fight to take them back. But surely some of them are too old, too young, too injured to serve. Everyone can serve somehow. The ones who can't fight work in factories. They build ships and weapons. They grow food for the troops. They care for the wounded. Everyone contributes what they can." Keitharan moved through the station, observing and recording. He stopped when he saw an elderly human woman sitting on a bench. She was small and frail, her white hair pulled back from a face lined with age and grief, but her eyes were hard as stone. He approached her carefully. "Excuse me. May I ask you some questions? I am an observer for the Galactic Concord." The woman looked up at him. She did not seem surprised or afraid of his alien appearance. "Ask. What brings you here?" "My colony fell. New Helsinki. I am sorry for your loss." The woman nodded. "My husband died in the first attack. My daughter and her children made it to the evacuation ships. My son stayed behind to fight. I don't know if he's alive or dead." Keitharan did not know what to say. The weight of her losses was staggering. "What will you do now?" "I'm too old to fight. Too old to work in a factory. But I can still do something." She held up her hands. They were trembling slightly, but her grip was firm. "I'm volunteering at the hospital, changing bandages, holding hands, reading to the soldiers who can't see anymore. Someone has to do it. You have lost so much. How can you still want to help?" The woman's eyes met his. There was no self-pity in them, only fire. Because giving up won't bring them back. Because crying in a corner won't win this war. Because somewhere out there, my son is fighting. And I'll be damned if I sit here and do nothing while he bleeds for us. She stood and walked away toward the hospital wing. Keitharan watched her go, unable to speak. Later that day, he met with a Dravex ambassador in a secure location on the station. The ambassador was part of a secret diplomatic mission, trying to arrange a ceasefire without the knowledge of the Dravex military leadership. He was clearly frightened. "You must help us," the ambassador said. "You must convince the humans to negotiate. They have refused all offers of peace." Ketharan replied. "They must be made to see reason. This war is destroying us." Ketharan tilted his head. "You are winning. You have taken 6 of their worlds." The ambassador made a sound that might have been a laugh, but it came out more like a sob. "We are not winning. We are drowning. For every world we take, we lose 10,000 soldiers. Our supply lines are bleeding. Our occupation forces are being murdered in their sleep. And the humans keep coming. They don't stop. They don't surrender. They don't break." He leaned forward, his reptilian eyes wide with fear. "We thought they were prey. We thought they would crumble at the first sign of real war. We were wrong. They are not prey. They are something else. Something terrible." "What do you mean?" "We have conquered 43 species. We know how war works. You break the enemy's will to fight, and they surrender. But the humans have no breaking point. The more we hurt them, the harder they fight. The more we take from them, the more they want to take from us." The ambassador's voice dropped to a whisper. "They are turning our victory into our grave." That night, Ketharan reviewed human history in his quarters. He read about wars that had lasted decades. He read about sieges where cities starved but refused to surrender. He read about resistance movements that fought for generations against impossible odds. He read about a species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times and always came back stronger. One passage caught his attention. It was from a human military leader, speaking about an ancient war on their homeworld. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." Those words had been spoken when humanity was on the edge of defeat, facing an enemy that seemed unstoppable. And yet they had won. Not because they were stronger or smarter or better equipped. They had won because they refused to accept any other outcome. Ketharan thought about the old woman at the refugee station. He thought about the soldiers who charged into certain death. He thought about the insurgents who refused to give up even when hope was gone. He thought about a species that did not know how to quit. A message arrived from the human military command. It was a strategic briefing, classified but shared with Concord observers. Ketharan read it carefully. The humans were not trying to stop the Dravex advance. They were letting their enemy push deeper into human space, stretching their supply lines thinner with every conquest. Meanwhile, human shipyards were working around the clock. Human factories were producing weapons at a rate that seemed impossible. Human training camps were turning civilians into soldiers by the hundreds of thousands. The humans were not losing this war. They were preparing to win it. A human admiral appeared in a recorded briefing. She was a tall woman with silver hair and cold eyes. She spoke directly to the camera. "The Dravex think they are conquering us. They think each victory brings them closer to our defeat. They are wrong. Every world they take is another world they must defend. Every kilometer they advance is another kilometer of supply line we can cut. They are not conquering us. They are walking into a trap." She smiled, and Ketharan felt ice in his veins. "In 3 months, we will be ready. And then we will show them what human beings can do when we stop holding back." Ketharan closed the briefing and sat in darkness. For the first time in his long career, he understood something about war that he had never grasped before. The Dravex measured victory in territory and bodies. The humans measured it in something far more dangerous. They measured it in will, and the humans had more will than any species he had ever seen. 8 months into the war, the humans stopped retreating. Ketharan stood on the observation deck of a Concord diplomatic vessel, watching the largest naval battle in galactic history unfold before his eyes. The Korath shipyards, a massive Dravex military installation, hung in space surrounded by 200 warships. It was the heart of Dravex power in this sector, the source of their endless supply of weapons and vessels. The humans had come to tear that heart out. 400 human warships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing the most heavily defended position in Dravex space. By any logical calculation, they should have been destroyed. They attacked anyway. Ketharan watched as human cruisers drove directly into the Dravex defensive line. They did not try to outmaneuver the enemy. They did not seek tactical advantages. They simply charged forward, weapons blazing, as if death held no meaning for them. The first wave was cut apart. 50 human ships became burning wreckage in the first 10 minutes. But they had opened a hole in the Dravex formation, and the second wave poured through it like water through a crack in a dam. The humans used tactics that Ketharan had never seen before. A squadron of destroyers deliberately allowed themselves to be surrounded, then detonated their reactors in a chain reaction that took 30 Dravex ships with them. Human fighters flew into the shipyards themselves, crashing through construction bays and ammunition storage facilities. Suicide runs, the Dravex called them. The humans called them acceptable trades. Then the human marines arrived. Ketharan had seen boarding actions before. They were delicate operations, requiring careful planning and precise execution. What the humans did was something else entirely. They launched themselves at Dravex ships in armored pods, blasting through hulls and fighting their way inside with nothing but rifles and rage. He watched footage from inside a Dravex dreadnought as human marines tore through its corridors. The Dravex were larger, stronger, better armored. It did not matter. The humans fought like something out of a nightmare. They kept coming even when wounded. They kept fighting even when dying. They screamed as they attacked, sounds that echoed through the ship's corridors like the howls of monsters. One Marine, his arm nearly severed by a Dravex blade, used his remaining hand to pull the pin on an explosive and tackled a group of enemy soldiers. The explosion killed 8 Dravex. The Marine's last words, captured by his helmet camera, were simple. For New Helsinki, the battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Korath shipyards were a field of debris. The human fleet had lost 140 ships. The Dravex had lost 212, plus the shipyards, plus 50 years of military construction, plus something far more valuable. They had lost their belief in victory. Keth Aaron interviewed captured Dravex officers in the days that followed. What he found disturbed him more than any battle footage. These were hardened warriors, veterans of dozens of campaigns. They should have been defiant in defeat, proud of their service. Instead, they were broken. One officer, a commander who had served the Imperium for 50 years, sat in his cell and stared at nothing. When Ketharan asked him about the battle, his voice was empty. "They don't stop," the commander said. "We killed them by the thousands. We burned their ships. We tore them apart. And they kept coming. They kept coming." He looked up at Ketharan with hollow eyes. "What are they?" Another prisoner, younger and more volatile, had to be restrained during his interview. He screamed at Ketharan, words tumbling over each other in his panic. "You told us they were prey. You told us they would break. They don't break. They don't surrender. They look at you while you kill them and they smile. They smile." The young soldier collapsed into sobs. "I want to go home. I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to fight them anymore." The human counteroffensive did not stop at Korath. Fleet after fleet pushed into Dravex space, liberating occupied human worlds and striking at military targets. The insurgents on those worlds rose up, joining the regular forces in a coordinated wave of destruction. Ketharan traveled to New Helsinki after its liberation. The colony had been under Dravex occupation for 7 months. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The humans who had stayed behind, the insurgents who had refused to surrender, emerged from the wilderness like ghosts. They were thin, scarred, missing limbs and eyes. Many had gone months without proper food or medical care. They should have been dead. Instead, they were celebrating. They embraced the soldiers who had come to liberate them. They wept with joy at seeing the sky free of Dravex patrols. They began rebuilding before the fighting was even over, clearing rubble and planting flags on the ruins of their homes. But what struck Ketharan most was not the celebration. It was what came after. The day after liberation, recruitment centers opened across New Helsinki. The lines were even longer than the ones he had seen at the refugee station. People who had just been freed from occupation, who had every reason to rest and recover, were signing up to fight. He asked one of them, a young man with fresh burns on his face and hate in his eyes, "You have been through so much. Why do you want to fight more?" The young man looked at him as if he were stupid. "Because it's not over. Because the Dravex are still out there. Because what they did to us, they'll do to someone else if we don't stop them." He straightened his damaged body and lifted his chin. "I'm going to make them pay. For every friend I buried. For every night I spent hiding in the mud. For everything. Major Tanaka found Ketharan at the edge of the celebration. She had changed since he first met her. Her arm was gone, replaced by a mechanical prosthetic. Her face was harder, older. She had seen things that no one should see. "You're troubled," she said. "I am trying to understand." "Understand what?" "Your people. This war. Everything." Ketharan struggled to find words. "I have seen species fight to the death before. I have seen desperate last stands and fanatical devotion, but this is different. You do not fight because you have no choice. You fight because you choose to. You could have accepted peace. You could have stopped at your own borders. Instead, you push forward. Why?" Tanaka was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "Because if we stop now, they'll try again. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 50. But eventually, they'll look at us and see prey again. They'll think we got lucky, that they made mistakes, that next time will be different." She turned to face him. "We will not let there be a next time. We will not leave this threat for our children to face. We end it now. Completely. Forever. Even if it means more death, more sacrifice. Especially then. The cost of total victory is terrible, but the cost of half measures is worse. We learned that lesson the hard way, a long time ago." That night, Ketharan watched as human ships jumped toward Dravik space. The counteroffensive was still growing. The humans were not just liberating their own worlds anymore. They were pushing into enemy territory, striking at the heart of the Imperium itself. They were not fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for victory. And Ketharan finally understood the terrible truth he had been avoiding. The Dravex had awakened something ancient and primal in human nature, something that had been sleeping since humans left their homeworld, something that had fought world wars and survived genocides and crawled out of the ashes of nuclear fire. The humans called it many things. Resolve, determination, will, but Ketharan had a different name for it, one from his own culture's ancient history. They called it the Wrath of the Righteous, and the galaxy had never seen anything like it. 14 months after the first shot was fired, the war ended. Ketharan stood in the great hall of the Dravex Imperial Palace, watching history unfold. The Dravex Emperor, once the most feared ruler in the galaxy, sat on his throne with his head bowed. Before him stood a human admiral, her uniform crisp and her expression cold. The terms of surrender were absolute. The Dravex military would be reduced to a defensive force only. War reparations would be paid to every human world that had suffered under occupation. The architects of the invasion would face trial for crimes against humanity, and the Dravex would never again threaten human space. The Emperor signed the document with trembling hands. His empire, 3,000 years old, had been humbled by a species they had dismissed as prey. In the weeks that followed, Ketharan traveled through Dravex space, observing the aftermath. He expected to see conquered worlds burning under human occupation. He expected revenge and destruction, and the terrible cost of victory. What he found was something else entirely. On the Dravex colony world of Thexaran, human forces had established a temporary government, but they were not terrorizing the population. They were rebuilding infrastructure. They were providing medical care. They were setting up schools. He watched as human soldiers handed out food to Dravex children, the same species that had invaded their homes and killed their families. The soldiers did not seem to enjoy it. Their faces were hard, their movements mechanical, but they did it anyway. A human colonel noticed Ketharan's confusion and approached him. "You're wondering why we're helping them?" "Yes. They invaded your worlds. They killed millions of your people. Why show them mercy?" The colonel looked out at the Dravex children eating human food. "Because destroying them won't bring back our dead. Because hatred is a fire that consumes the one who carries it. Because we're better than what they did to us." He paused. "And because if we treat them the way they treated us, we become them. We lose the very thing we were fighting for." Ketharan struggled to process this. "But your people, the survivors, the families of the dead, they must want revenge. Some do. And they'll have to learn to live without it." The colonel's voice was tired but firm. "We fought this war to end a threat, not to create a new one. If we grind the Dravex into the dust, if we humiliate and brutalize them, they'll spend the next 1,000 years waiting for a chance to get even. We'd be planting the seeds of another war. So instead you help them. We help them become something better than they were. We show them that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty. We give their children a chance to grow up without wanting to kill us." The colonel shook his head. "It's not mercy. It's strategy. The only way to truly win a war is to make sure it never has to be fought again." Catharan returned to the neutral assembly station to prepare his final report for the Galactic Concord. He sat in his quarters, surrounded by data pads and holographic displays, trying to put into words what he had witnessed. How do you explain a species that treats war as the worst thing they can do, and then commits to it completely when forced? How do you explain warriors who charge to certain death for strangers? How do you explain a people who can unleash terrible destruction, and then turn around and build schools for their enemies' children? He wrote draft after draft, each one feeling inadequate. Finally, he gave up trying to explain the facts, and simply wrote what he had learned. The door to his quarters chimed. Major Tanaka entered, her mechanical arm gleaming in the low light. She moved differently now, Catharan noticed. The fire that had burned in her eyes throughout the war had faded to embers. "I came to say goodbye," she said. "I'm being reassigned to the reconstruction efforts." "You are leaving the military?" "No, just changing how I serve." She sat down across from him. "The war is over, but the work isn't. Someone has to help put things back together. Might as well be someone who knows how much it costs to break them." They sat in silence for a moment. Catharan found himself wanting to ask her something he had wondered about since the beginning. "Major, throughout this war, I have seen your people do terrible things. I have seen them sacrifice themselves without hesitation. I have seen them fight with a fury that terrified hardened warriors, but I have also seen them show kindness to their enemies. I have seen them rebuild what they destroyed. I have seen them choose mercy when they could have chosen revenge." He leaned forward. "How do you contain such contradictions? How can you be both so terrible and so gentle?" Tanaka was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "War is the worst thing we do. It's the failure of every other option. It's the admission that we couldn't find a better way." She looked at her mechanical arm, flexing the fingers slowly. "But sometimes, there is no better way. Sometimes, someone threatens everything you love, and the only choice is to stop them. And when that happens, you have to stop them completely. Half measures just mean more war later. More death, more suffering." She met his eyes. "We fight hard because we hate fighting. We destroy completely because we want to build something that lasts. We show mercy to our enemies because we remember what we're fighting for. It's not about them. It's about us. It's about who we want to be when the guns fall silent." After she left, Catharan completed his report. He included all the data, all the analysis, all the observations he had made over 14 months of war, but at the end, he added a personal note, a warning to the Concord, and to any species that might read his words in the future. He wrote about human endurance, their ability to suffer and keep fighting when any other species would have surrendered. He wrote about human creativity, their terrifying talent for turning anything into a weapon. He wrote about human fury, the primal rage that emerged when they were pushed too far. But most importantly, he wrote about human choice. Other species fought because they had to, because survival demanded it, because their nature compelled them. Humans chose to fight. They chose when to start, how hard to push, and when to stop. They chose to show mercy when they could have shown none. They chose to rebuild when they could have destroyed. That choice, Catharan wrote, was what made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not their strength, or their numbers, or their technology. Their ability to decide who they wanted to be, and then become it, no matter the cost. His final words were a warning. Do not mistake human friendliness for weakness. Do not mistake their preference for peace as inability to wage war. They are the galaxy's most pleasant neighbors, and its most terrible enemies. The difference between the two is entirely in your hands. They will give you every chance to choose friendship. They will work with you, trade with you, build with you. But if you threaten what they love, if you force them to fight, they will become something else entirely, and you will not survive it. Catharan submitted the report and walked to his observation window one last time. The stars stretched out before him, countless points of light in the endless dark. Somewhere out there, human ships were carrying supplies to former enemy worlds. Human doctors were treating Dravek's wounded. Human teachers were opening schools for children who had been taught to hate them. The war was over. The peace was beginning. And Ketharan finally understood what he had witnessed. He had thought he knew war. He had been wrong. He had watched a species that loved peace wage the most terrible war in galactic history. He had seen them pay prices that would have broken any other civilization, and he had watched them emerge not as conquerors, but as builders. That was the human way. They did not fight because they wanted to. They fought because they could not bear to see what they loved destroyed. And that terrible, beautiful love made them unstoppable. Ketharan retired from military analysis the following year. He had seen enough. But he kept a human phrase on his desk for the rest of his life, a reminder of everything he had learned. Si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. The humans understood that better than anyone. And the galaxy would never forget it.